You've all heard of the phone book game, where one person whispers something to one's ear and then another person whispers, and it goes on till the last person tries to say what the first person said, and usually comes out something totally different from what is being said. A lot of critics of Christianity use this argument, saying that the early church transmitted the Gospels orally, just like a phone book game. There's lots of mistakes being made and all these things that are happening, and it comes out, the outcome comes out totally different than what the original was. The problem with that is that the way they did things in the first century is totally different than the way we do it now. First of all, there was a very low literacy rate, about 5%, according to most historians would say. So nobody was reading and writing at that particular time. In our culture, at least in the Western culture, kids are taught to learn to read and write from an early age, and that's how they usually comprehend things, by reading and writing and whatnot. So the skill of listening is less heightened because of these skills that are being learned with reading and writing. But in the first century, the skill of listening was totally heightened because they didn't read and write. So, and examples of this you can find, for instance, Dr. Craig Evans spoke about this study that was done with these in modern times, with Jewish students who would be learning from a Jewish rabbi. They would circle around the rabbi, and the rabbi would teach them certain things, what he believed and whatnot, but they would be expected to not only recite what he's saying word for word, but also recite the Old Testament scriptures too. And interestingly enough, they did this in front of hundreds of people. They would recite word for word what the rabbi said, just by listening, not by writing anything down or reading it, but only by listening. Another example is Dr. Craig I think it's Dr. Craig Bloomberg. He was mentioning how there was a missionary to Baghdad, where this missionary played this game with the kids in Baghdad, this phone book game, and the outcome was the children got it right 100% of the time. They couldn't really understand what was so funny about the game, because when what came from the first person was exactly the same as what came from the last child. So the game was not working for these children because they learn in an oral way. This is what most Middle Eastern children, how they learn. So the type of thinking that the phone book game is the same thing that's happening in the Christian circles in the first century is just ridiculous for that notion. Jesus spoke many times, and a lot of times he'd say, "This I say to you," or "It is written, but I say this," and it's which presupposes that the people were just listening. They weren't writing these things down. Now, I have a 3.5-year-old daughter, and she can't read or write at all. But when she reads her favorite book, she opens up and looks at the pictures, and she can read it word for word. And what I do sometimes is when I read to her, I won't show her the book, but I'll read the book, especially if it's a favorite book of hers, right? I'll say something like, for instance, the book says, Jill walked over the hill and splashed in the water. And I would change it deliberately and say, Jill walked over the hill and splashed in the mud. And she would say, "Oh, no, that's not right, Daddy. It's water, not mud," right? So she, with her thinking, her listening skills are heightened because she can't read or write. And so she immediately picks out these mistakes. And that, I would say, is the same thing that was going on in the early first century. People would understand and know that, hey, that's wrong, that's not what was being said, kind of thing. And another thing to consider too is that, think about your one of the most important days of your life, whether it was I don't know, like you just got married, or perhaps as a teenager you're just graduating from high school, or your sweet 16 birthday, or whatever the case may be, whatever a special event in your life, one of the most special events. You usually, most people will recount exactly what happened that day. A few minor details might be different, but the point is that they would the main facts about that particular time, that particular day, including what they wore, who they're with, the people involved, what was being presented to them, all these details. Usually, people can recount those things, and so the same is true in the first century. This is a very important time for people. This is the good news that the Messiah has come, and therefore, they're going to remember this thing as a major event. It's not just just nothing going on and let's play the phone book game, but they were actually retelling one of the most important news of their lives, which was the good news is Jesus has come to save us, and to make all things right, in a sense. So, to use that argument, I think is fallacious.